It sounds pretty weird to me too, actually. So just volume. Just a tad. There we go. That should be about where I like it. Okay. Spooky indeed. They're all supposed to be spooky. They're not all supposed to be sad. Okay, so I guess... Yeah, it is a nice title screen. I like the art in this game for what I've seen so far. Okay, that's hella loud on my end. Even though it's not bad for you guys, it's super loud for me. Super loud. Okay. Is it... I assume descend is... resume is probably load. Yup. So I'm assuming descend is start? Yes. Today is the day my life begins. I want to give it the best inauguration I can. How many embarrassing pages have I filled with my inane, rambling thoughts? Entry upon entry chronicling my failures and excuses. In the academy, they taught us these journals were meant to be our anchor. My mentors practiced the same due diligence with me as they did with all the rest. They inspected my daily journals. They met with me in the privacy of their offices to reconcile my course with the teachings of order. I don't care. The narrator might be female, but the narrator is always my bass voice. Unless they're speaking, in which case sometimes I am willing to give a main character who is female a female speaking voice, but only sometimes. Like Kaede got it because she was around for so short a period of time. Ha! I believe they tried in earnest. They told me I was always but a hair's breadth from my calling. That I had only to work harder, look deeper within myself, keep going, even when I couldn't summon the enthusiasm of my classmates for anything at all. Every day was carried along the currents of routine. I had no cause to step out of line, but neither could I ever exceed their most basic expectations. When the acquaintances from my school years graduated into their assigned guilds, disciplines, and professions, I remained behind. My mind was perpetually echoing all the earliest words of our mentors. The reassurances they gave me before even they resigned themselves to my self-imposed mediocrity. It was just a matter of time. The motivation would come. I would find my purpose. I remained in that passively optimistic state for years, hidden away in the bedroom of my childhood, reading about the vivid lives of countless distant, unapproachable others. Yeah, I like what they've done with the fonts so far. I put false thoughts to paper every night for my submissions to the Department of Labor. I was always on the cusp of a breakthrough. To the auditor assigned to my case, I know this may well be the last entry you ever see. Please consider this my official statement of guilt. Though it may appear that my family sheltered me through this time of crisis, it was I who fabricated the flesh worker's diagnoses. The imaginary illnesses that plagued me over the past 6 years were entirely of my own invention. My guardians had every desire to turn me in. I hid their letters to the ministry. I misdirected their ethereal projections. When even that was not enough, I misappropriated the gifts of my particular school of magic to manipulate their expectations. Their perception was altered by degrees until they could no longer recognize my faults. I am a textbook case of that lowest form of scum. The kind that threatens the reputation score of every citizen I meet by compulsively sinking my own with every breath I take. I can only hope this admission will be considered in the disciplinary hearings of my guardians. They gave me every opportunity to amend my flawed character, and it is with my loving family in mind that I take this opportunity now. I, Vekon Iskra, would like to formally rescind my citizenship rights. I volunteer myself as a ward of the Council of New Order for the upcoming anniversary expedition into the Inverted Spire. It is my hope that this journey will cleanse me of my sins against the state of order, and instill me with that elusive sense of purpose I have sought my entire life. Do you have to fucking tie my hands? I'm going in willingly. The air in the wings of the ritual amphitheater was stiflingly hot. I felt myself sweating in my council-issued robes. But it must have been far worse for the officer beside me. They wore an elongated mask beneath their heavy cowl, and full-length leather gloves that left no part of their body exposed. I stared down at my weather-beaten sandals. The spire's corruption had left the ground beneath our feet arid and lifeless. We stood at the epicenter of a wasteland where every river had dried, and all but the most resilient weeds had shriveled. But there was something far worse in this corrupted place than the sweltering heat. It was a kind of ambiance. Some might experience it as a low hum, or other extrasensory malaise. Goes into the tower willingly and sings blind, but right? For me, it first manifested as a headache. Yeah, this song is a banger, you're right. All through my ride from the corrective camps, I felt my forehead throb in tandem with every mound and crevice in the way of our squeaking caravan. Here, at such terrible proximity, it had become a background murmur. I felt my attention drifting. Even as the ritual chant grew louder, even as the officer placed a firm hand on my shoulder and guided me past the tiered seating onto the circular arena. The opening ceremonies were about to be concluded. I knew the start of an expedition had always been a public event, but never before had I traveled to see it. That's good, hand. It would have surprised me if it had been otherwise. Profiles of 7 chosen would arrive by morning post, along with detailed lithographs and lurid descriptions of their crimes. Those who couldn't go in person would gather to see live broadcasts at public scrying fountains. Bets would be placed on the order in which the chosen wards would die. There would be music and dancing lights and drunken festivities all through the evening. Never once had I placed my bet. Gripped by the apathetic fog that had shrouded my whole life, I never felt any reason to partake. In that moment, I felt it eclipse me again. The colossal roar of the audience felt distant. Was it really my own 2 feet taking those slow, even strides? Was it my own body moving towards that ominous platform of charcoal black stone? Or did it grow nearer and wider of its own accord? Something stumbled against my side. There was a fellow ward before me. I could see lines embroidered on their sleeves, 2 solid bands on each forearm. Those lines must represent a number. I felt so foolish for not recognizing it before, even if it was probably because my arms only had a single band each. So my bandits must designate me as one. That trivial observation somehow made the moment so much more real. I began to notice more relevant and disturbing details. The other ward had blundered into my path because they were completely enveloped in nullifying charms. Even their face was unreadable under the fraying swathe. They had been rendered incapable of using their powers. I shuddered at the thought. But their assigned guard was already pulling them away. The guard at my own back had once again placed their steady hand on my shoulder. This was not meant as a reassurance, it was a warning. Keep walking. I was noticing a great deal more now. The figure striding towards me from the opposite direction was marked as 5. They stared directly ahead, not at me, but rather beyond me. Their hair was tied back in an immaculate top knot, so tight it threatened to tear free from their scalp. 5 looked like the sort of person who didn't take a single breath out of turn. Yet imposing as they were in their own neurotically authoritative way, 5 was dwarfed by the massive figure coming up on their left. 4 was stout and broad-shouldered. The loose, unkempt braid hanging down the side of their neck looked like a convenient afterthought. Their wavering strides reminded me of an early morning daze, one where the world was muted and not yet real. It looked something like my own state before 2 blundered onto my path. Just behind me, a little to my right, I could see our approaching 7. Their eyes were visibly red and swollen. The face of the short, slim-figured 7 was still glistening from a recent onslaught of tears. Between their stature and the full head of curls, they looked like an overgrown child. This was surely the one the onlookers bet on, the one they thought would be the first to die. Shoving the unpleasant thought from my mind, I shifted my attention to another figure striding in from my right. Their posture was affably self-assured. The 6 of our circle wore an expression so politely insubstantial, I might have mistaken their smile for a mannerly stranger passing me on the roadside. I felt an involuntary chill. These are to be my comrades in arms. A burst of laughter brought my attention to the one would-be comrade who passed me by. There was no way they could have escaped the notice of our audience. 3 was a tall, gangly figure with coarse hair that sprang out in all directions. They were the only one of us who seemed to actually be enjoying themselves. Those frenzied eyes glanced every which way. Their arms were raised like a council minister on parade. I could only have missed them before because despite their easy gait, 3 proceeded towards the platform more slowly than the rest of us. They spun in place, skipped, and chortled. Even the urging of their assigned officer did little to dampen their enthusiasm. It was as though they wanted to draw out the moment. That one will kill us all, I thought, and very nearly believed it. I felt something against my knees and looked down to see the platform before me. The slight elevation was actually a border. I stepped over it onto the platform floor. You may sit. I braced myself for a blisteringly hot surface. And was pleasantly surprised to find the stone felt cold. So the border is a bench. That must mean this platform is our vehicle. Was it a part of the spire itself? The unnatural temperature certainly hinted at something magical, if not necessarily sinister. A mere arm's breadth to my left, 2 nearly tripped over the barrier. They lurched several steps towards the center of the platform before retrieving their bearings. A part of me wanted to rise from my place and guide them towards a nearby seat. We'll help too. I found myself rushing to help too before the thought had fully entered my mind. The officers didn't bother to stop me. This way. I didn't volunteer myself for this accursed expedition just for my old indifference to overtake me here. I even felt a little proud. So what if we'd been stripped of our citizenship privileges? I thought of the goodwill quotient, the discreet little modifier on our daily evaluations at the academy. What was it they used to call it? The most fulfilling dimension of all? Only our mentors and the unseen auditors we were eventually assigned knew how it was actually calculated. A ward of the council had no score, nothing to assess our place, but the natural pleasure of upholding order, as our mentors used to say, was an eternal constant. It gave me comfort even now. Two had gladly accepted my help. Perhaps they meant to say something in return, but the bindings extended across their face, rendering all but the most tight-lipped murmur impossible. I felt them squeeze my arm, once warmly, before letting go. By the time I'd guided two to their seat on the circular bench, 4, 5, and 6 had already found their places. I took my own next to the silent 2. 3 and 7 had not yet caught up with us, but I could hear the cause of 7's delay, even without turning to look behind me. I didn't want to see it. They had taken to openly wailing, a long, ugly, bitter sound that made me wince with sympathetic embarrassment.
No, I won't, I can't, I don't want to, they'll kill me.
And by they, 7 means us, I realized. The 3 wards seated across from me were also tactfully diverting their gaze. A part of me wanted to find out if any of them were considering it in earnest. 7 knew their outburst would achieve nothing, that much was obvious. Maybe we all knew a little of what that felt like. The knowledge that you were hopelessly wrong, and how helpless you felt for doing it anyway. Wasn't that how we all arrived here? Or was it just me who felt that way? I let the uncomfortable thoughts sink in. For all I know, I might be seated among a group of bloodthirsty fiends with nothing but murder on their minds. I had only to reach in for myself. I weighed my insecurity against my common sense. I think we should look. Time was different inside another person's mind. Slow and warped, but present nonetheless. There was no telling how much time I had or how long they'd be at a healthy distance to try. Anyone with exposure to mentalists might guess what I was doing from my expression alone, so I was limited. I had to be careful. But that wasn't about to stop me. I resolved to constrain myself, one mind only. Four. I reached in and instantly felt myself disoriented. Hey Casey, welcome to the stream. How you doing tonight, dude? This mindscape felt fragmented, even brittle. Thoughts formed and crumpled under the weight of 1,000 tangential implications. I struggled to attune myself with their frequency. No matter where I looked, there was that awful wailing. Faltering one moment and receding into tears, then rising, shrieking as though that might drown out the laughter of the crowd. That's good, I'm glad you're doing well. Yeah, our MC can read minds. They can also alter minds. It was feeling around inside my head, trying to find my own fear and draw it out into the open. But I had lost my fear somehow. It was replaced by a blanketing dullness, as though all my senses had dimmed. There was just this moment, no room for fear when you can't conceive of what comes next. I knew this feeling. There was safety in pieces. That whale was relentlessly tying the pieces together, from moment to moment, forcing them taut, erecting the monument of its own dread. I looked them in the face before it started, and now that face was imprinted on my mind. I sensed a familiar, sickly anticipation building in my throat. There had always been something enticing about the needy ones. The way they wrung their hands and they're perpetually glancing at the ground. How their tone faltered and retreated from their words. And how they shrank into themselves as though merely sharing the air you breathe was already an imposition. It was so easy to imagine the same shrinking posture somewhere else when there was no one else to see you. So strangely gratifying to watch them fulfill your directions in their haste to please. How quickly you could become their whole world. How they were overwhelmed with gratitude at your guidance and protection. We had no way of surviving this journey. Nobody had and nobody ever would. I forced the intrusive thought back into its hole. Even if this was the end, in the uncharted depths, in a place beyond judgment, at least I might have this one indulgence. Oh, of course. I hate when this happens, but you could hardly survive adolescence as a mentalist without stumbling upon a few awkward fantasies. Ugh. I tore myself from the mindscape of 4 with a pronounced gasp like a diver breaking water. Cloying, oily water. Unpleasantly sticky. Fortunately, none of the others showed any sign of noticing my reaction. If he's not, he fully intends to utilize his strength to convince Seven that Seven should take care of his needs, so to speak. Or that's what it seems like. 4 seemed especially preoccupied. I wasn't sure if I ought to feel relieved or worried. My thoughts were mercifully interrupted by the sight of 3 vaulting across the border. They settled casually alongside our mysterious 2. 3 cocked their head, a look of curiosity settled on their face. The commotion that had been going on behind me had now evolved into a frantic struggle beside me. I was trying more and more desperately to ignore it, and here was 3 staring at it head on. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw gloved hands wrestling 7 down onto the bench. If I turned to look, I might catch a glimpse of their abilities or whatever frenzied antics had made such an ordeal of subduing them. But that wasn't the only opportunity in that moment. Ugh. Read 3 while they're distracted, I think, is a good call. Three was lively, present, and aware, more so than any of the rest of us. Who knows when I'd find another moment that would catch them so preoccupied as to actually miss my vacant stare. Now was my chance. I concentrated on their face as they looked past me, still focused on 7. There was something like a burst of light. It was as though I'd stopped beyond a curtain onto an impossibly massive stage. Shadows cast by countless elusive thoughts flickered across my path. There was a restless dark beyond, a grand imaginary audience, a gap between an impassable abyss. 3 was a performer through and through. To take something incomprehensible from such an alien mindscape, I'd have to immerse myself in their act.
They were actually fighting to hold the little one down. Massive hands in such a tiny frame, stopping just short of unleashing their full capacity for violence. Wouldn't want to kill the lamb before the sacrifice. It was strange to be so valuable in that moment. Even the officers of the Security Bureau couldn't compel us too much. Not to our very lives, as they so often did with dissidents in their line of duty. Supposing we might coordinate it now. I tear the wrappings off of 2 with my bare hands. 4 grabs the officer at their back and smashes their skull against the polished stone. Mayhem ensues. Some of us make it as far as the wings. We try to leap the barricade somehow and cut through the audience, running for the corrupted wastes. On and on and on and on to the foreign lands beyond. And who knows what awaits us there? But you would have run a long time ago, wouldn't you, if you really thought you could pull it off? What was keeping you in the New Order all those years? Always traveling between provinces, from backwater town to sprawling port city to little prairie village on the edge of the corruption itself. How many times did you gaze into the unfathomable abyss? Unfathomable distance. Imagine the many lives you might have lived in that other place so far away and refuse the call. This is the only journey for you now. I've always wanted to go out with a bang. The orchestra blaring, a crackle of thunder, a burst of self-immolating flame. But when the time came, I was hungover and bleary-eyed, still coming off the wake route, barely dressed. I thought I knew who turned me in, and maybe for that, more than anything else, I let them take me. So they could walk me through the encampment, and I'd meet the eyes of every fucker who didn't try to stop them. Corrective camps are not a good place for the wake route dependent. It was an exciting time, never quite knowing when withdrawal would rip the ground out from under me. And now, just for that grand occasion, they cleaned me up and left me in the caravan with a pouch of dried wake root that might once have lasted me for days. So of course I had it all at once. How long until the effects start to wear, and I end up like our small friend there, curled up and shaking in some abyssal hole deep below the surface? Only time will tell.
I disentangled myself from the knot of troubled speculations. So 3 was a habitual wake root chewer. Harmless enough on the outside, where the herb was plentiful, and their itinerant profession might require that well-known wake root excitability for traveling long roads at odd hours of night. Restless agitation, wandering eyes, the world slowed down and your mind sped past it. Looking at 3 now, it all made sense. Although there was no real way of distinguishing the effects of the chew from their eccentric personality, not right this minute at least. We would unfortunately learn the difference when 3 went into that inevitable withdrawal partway through our descent. This was worrying. Perhaps I should tell the others the first chance I got. Give the signal. A rapid explosive force tore across the edge of the arena. It circled the whole perimeter, forming gargantuan clouds of smoke and dust. A secondary wave of bright, colorful tendrils coiled into the air, dotted by countless pinpricks of light. Emerging from somewhere beyond the wings, a marching band began to play. The sky above us was blanketed by a kaleidoscopic fog. The crowd hollered and cheered beyond our sight.
It's beautiful. What a send-off.
3 gave an exaggerated laugh. They sounded more bitter than impressed. I almost wasn't sure how to feel about it. It's pretty, but grotesque. No matter how impressive, the spectacle was still celebrating our descent. Given the history of war admissions into the Spire, they might as well be celebrating our deaths. Isn't it a little morbid?
Of course, that's what makes it so enticing. When you live a quiet, orderly life, and you know there's some rampant hedonist out there living it up every chance they get. There's no greater pleasure than to watch them reap their just rewards. The pomp and fanfare are just the icing on your retribution cake.
7 looked flustered by 3's words, as though their amazement felt shameful to them now. I felt bad for them, but ultimately 3 and I were on the same page. This whole ceremony was a farce. It felt like a thinly veiled public execution, much like the ones our mentors once described when they told us of darker, more unsettled times before the Council of New Order brought us into our present era of security and peace. Even with all the odds against us, I had gone into this believing there was a chance, no matter how slim, at destroying the thing at the bottom of the spire. There had to be a possibility of returning victorious to reclaim our citizenship. But far from encouraging those ambitions, the flamboyant spectacle of the opening ceremony was beginning to make me feel as though there might not be any hope at all. Yeah, fuck it.
Are you really so self-centered that you think this whole thing is some kind of show put on to sate the bloodthirsty, law-abiding crowd? We're here for a purpose. If you don't mean to fulfill it, then at least do us the courtesy of not trying to actively sabotage our morale. Oh, touched a nerve there, did I?
They're right, you know. Nobody wants to hear that, as if reckoning with whatever awaits us isn't hard enough already. All these characters are so nondescript, it's really hard to pick out voices. I'm assuming 6 is a girl. And I'm running out of girl voices.
Well, you might not want to hear it, but it's true. Personally, I appreciate the honesty. It's a good start. Refreshing, even.
And I officially wish 6 dies because, you know, how much I hate that voice. 5 didn't look especially happy with his turn in the conversation, but neither did they try to respond.
I think the best there would be trying our hardest to get along.
7 responded in such a quiet, wavering voice, I wondered if anyone else had actually heard them. But even if they had, there wasn't much chance to reply. With a tremendous crunch, like the gears of some ancient rusted mechanism making their first painstaking rotation, the platform beneath us lurched to life. I barely registered the sound before I realized my head was mere inches above the arena itself. Packed, well-trodden dust gave way to rough-hewn stone. The walls of the shaft had the same cool, chalky surface as the platform. We were going down at considerable speed. I found myself wondering, once again, if the platform was truly part of the spire itself. Could the council manually control its movements, or did it merely begin the descent if the requisite number of bodies was present on its surface? Either option suggested a plethora of ill-fated possibilities. Somewhere above us, I heard the music stop. The council representative had begun their speech. By then we were merciful deep. Their words were nothing but a cadence. Something vaguely grandiose and profound that we would never hear. I watched the prismatic mists dissipate across our circular patch of sky. Over time, the voices faded. The sky returned to a featureless gray. The circle above us was already no larger than my outstretched hand. 6 was the first to break our silence.
So where do you think it really came from?
Their voice was politely inquisitive, but even so, no one seemed eager to voice their personal theories aloud. Where what came from? 4 sounded as though they'd been lost in thought, and the question caught them completely off guard. Perhaps they were still fantasizing about 7. I felt the commitment to silence dissolve around me. It seemed the absurdity of 4's response had opened the floor to a second conversation.
The spire, you nip dimwit.
3 sounded equal parts scathing and amused. I got the impression they had already made up their mind to dislike 4.
Try to keep up. I've heard that's important down here. I always thought it was some kind of accident.
7 swallowed a sob as they spoke. Their tone still had the stilted, wavering quality of someone who might revert to weeping at any moment. I considered what theory I should offer. Some kind of magical disaster. Perhaps it was my fear that deep down 7 and I were all too alike, and I found myself quick to offer support for their half-baked theory. It might have been some kind of a personal experiment gone wrong. Like that story about the famous graviturge who leveled a city by trying to reduce the mass of something too small to be observed, or the shapeshifter tried to become a bee colony. Trying to remember 5's voice. Shit, oh.
That's very plausible. Too many citizens don't understand the proper value of order. They break the law in 1,000 petty ways and think they can make up for it with the broad strokes, when the reality is that every bylaw, no matter how minor, has its purpose.
Behold the law-abiding criminal.
We're all here with good reason.
I noticed 5's voice in that moment had the rushed, conciliatory tone of a student slamming their grimoire shut before their classmate could spot the erotic contraband hidden between its pages. Interesting. Perhaps I should have read them after all. 3 was clearly unconvinced by the sudden change in 5's tone.
I think our culprit acted with intent.
6 maintained a tranquil demeanor. They put me in mind of a mentor, as though they already knew the answer to their own question and were graciously offering us the opportunity to increase our reputation scores by attempting it. How dumb do you have to be to try to shapeshift into multiple things? Yeah, it probably doesn't work out super great. 4, who had since retreated into themselves, finally tried to speak again. But then who's the culprit?
Who indeed? For who would be so brazen as to break the very laws of reality? So daring as to challenge the bedrock of new order and make their abilities the question itself? You sound as though you'd like to meet them. Meet them? I'd like to be them.
You'd like to be the root of all evil at the base of the Inverted Spire. But who gets to decide the meaning of evil?
We all turned to stare at the source of this new voice. The charms entangling 2 had come undone. They were brushing them off like an unwelcome spiderweb. What lay beneath was almost disappointingly unremarkable. Small, disapproving eyes under close-knit curls and a face weighed down by middle age.
And why are they so eager to convince us that after a century of failed expeditions with armies and trained researchers and eventually the very dregs of society itself, why, after all that, are they so anxious to uphold the charade that we're actively trying to destroy it?
Who says it's a charade?
2 turns out to be Medusa, maybe. 7 spoke shrilly as though the suggestion was personally offensive.
Maybe they're trying as hard as they can. That would imply incompetence.
Six-eyed Seven with an evaluating expression.
It's obvious, isn't it? We're not here to destroy anything. Of course they want a way to thin the bottom feeders of their perfect order. We're nothing but a sacrifice to appease whatever monster lies below.
The monster you'd like to become.
I'd rather be the lich at the base of the spire than become its prey.
3 sounded a little more somber now. Just then, I think we all felt it. The unwanted reminder that no one had ever survived their journey past the first level of the spire. There was no way of knowing if anyone had reached its base. Besides the publicized speculations of the first wave of researchers, nobody knew how deep it was. After the first descent came the blackout. No scrying stone could track our progress deeper. There were only our phylacteries in the vaults of the State Security Bureau. They would crumble to dust on the precise date and hour of our deaths. Our collective malaise was interrupted by a small circular podium, which had begun to rise from the center of the platform. It was a projection plate, I realized, time-worn and poorly maintained. The instrument crackled, wrestling with the intent to perform its proper function.
It lives.
3 gave an exaggerated cackle. 6 cringed, regarding 3 with an all too personal look of disdain. The familiar outline of the governor administrator flickered into existence. We all knew that impassive smile, the same one that had welcomed us to the corrective camps and informed us of our selection for the expedition.
Congratulations, chosen wards.
They even used the same tired, drawling monotone in which they delivered all their pronouncements. It could not have sounded less congratulatory.
You have taken the first step in your journey towards reclaiming citizenship in the New Order.
The image flickered and returned, now wreathed in a stately ceremonial robe. This fragment had the crispness of a new recording, one that was not so taken by decay. The corruptive influence of the spire was said to accelerate the natural erosion of enchantments, and it showed.
As is customary at the first descent, I will now read you your formal introductions. You may take this opportunity to become acquainted with your newfound companions, their magical discipline, form of profession, and of course, the crimes that reduce their reputation scores below the threshold of social acceptability.
I felt my throat tighten. This might change everything. Glancing about the platform, I could see I wasn't the only one disconcerted by this turn of events.
They're not really gonna read our crimes, are they?
No, that's not right. 1.
Oh no. Dear human player, you've reached the end of 2020 Spooktober Jam prototype. Thank you for playing. A more complete and polished version of Chapter 1 is forthcoming. We hope to see you again very soon. Okay. So, what can I say about this game? I have to play the full thing. True. Secrets. Yes, very captivating world. The world is super interesting. I would like to know more about it. the characters seem interesting. All of them seem diverse. It all feels well written. The only thing I wish have any of you guys seen Sin City? Of course you haven't, Retro. You don't imbibe good media. You come here. Uh I wish that there was something done in order to differentiate the characters a little more. Is basically where I'm eventually going with this. Especially 4 and 6. And I kind of wish there was like something to differentiate their designs. And I have a feeling, looking at them now that we've seen more of 2, I think 2 and 7 almost look identical as well. Which is slightly problematic for creating an attachment to any of the characters, which is important, as we've all discussed. We've discussed it a couple of times now throughout the jam. It's important to form attachments to the characters within a relatively short period of time in a visual novel, because there is no gameplay beyond the attachment to the characters that really and the story itself that can attract you to a visual novel. It's not like Genshin, where even if I didn't care about the story, I could still enjoy the gameplay. All there is story and art. And music, I suppose, is also fair. So I feel like it's pretty important with visual novels to create some sort of attachment to the characters and story very quickly. Yeah, this is true, Hand. And it is harder to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible to do that, but it is definitely harder to do that when there is less of a difference between the characters. And at first, the only thing you have of a character is their appearance. Even if their personality is very different, even if the way they speak is very different, etc. At first, when you are first introduced to a character, especially when you're introduced to all the characters in one screen at the same time, for all intents and purposes, the only thing you have to differentiate them is their appearance. And so it's important to have characters be pretty different from each other. Other than that, I'm super interested and I want to play the rest of this game. So I really do hope that they do continue working on it. I'm assuming they're intending to, because they basically said they were.